The fourth episode of Season 3 is finally here. After a short week of rest, it's time to go back to the Seven Kingdoms. And this chapter opens with a group of men being forced to drag logs toward a castle. Every man capable of lifting weight ends up recruited, no matter what he was doing. The 15,000 soldiers under Lord Ormond's command enter people's houses to stay there overnight, without caring what they might think about it. Having to endure the soldiers' lecherous stares, men who have been away from their homes for a long time and don't care who each woman belongs to, only wanting to satisfy their urges. In Lord Footle's main house, they are quite unhappy about this invasion, but Ormond reminds them that having knelt before Rhaenyra is punished with death, so either they stop complaining or lose their heads. It's their choice, since Tumbleton no longer has any defenses, and they are practically prisoners, even though they're being treated better than they should be. When Footle's wife tells Ormond straight to his face that Rhaenyra is the rightful queen, he gets angry. He assures her that she's nothing but a bitch with a dragon, that she'll soon lose everything she has, since his mission is to restore the legitimate line to the throne. A few seconds later, his trusted man shows up to tell him that Lord Baratheon keeps making excuses to move his troops, which means they won't have his support for the moment. And that's not good news. Ormond is furious. Baratheon secured a marriage to one of Aemon's daughters, and now he refuses to lend his help. That's something he swears he'll make him pay for in blood. However, for the moment, there are more urgent matters, since there's still no news from Harrenhal, the last place Vhagar was seen, and without her, their defenses won't withstand a direct attack from Rhaenyra and her dragon seeds. The real Daeron, who is right beside him and has dyed his hair to go unnoticed, is deeply worried about his brother's health, since there's been no word of him for days, and he has no idea that someone stabbed him and that his life is in the hands of the witch Alice. Back in King's Landing, Rhaenyra can't understand why Ormond would take a town like Tumbleton, which has no defenses or soldiers. Its main activity is trade, so why risk his life to take that particular place? The problem in solving this situation is that the soldiers are inside innocent people's houses, so using dragons isn't an option. On top of that, slaughtering people who knelt before her and accepted her rule would make her look like Maegor, and the same gods who gave her the throne would take it away for such cruelty. This is where Orwyl decides to step in and tell her that the Riverlands army, marching under Daemon's orders, isn't far from Tumbleton, and it would be far more merciful to use soldiers to clear the enemy's houses than to send in the dragons. Rhaenyra accepts his advice and tells him that as long as he stays loyal and useful, he can have a seat at her table. So orders are immediately sent to Lord Tully to divert his march and head to Tumbleton to free the town from Ormond's soldiers. However, in order to get his position as Grand Maester back, he must accept new responsibilities. Above all, that Mysaria must learn everything that arrives by Raven, since she is the advisor who holds the Queen's full trust. But since it will take the Riverlands army weeks to reach Tumbleton, Rhaenyra orders a dragon to be sent to stand guard, so they can make sure Ormond doesn't leave the town beforehand, since he chose to get himself into this problem, and now she'll decide when he gets out of it. Once the problems outside the castle are settled for the moment, Mysaria tells her that the lack of resources is causing a lot of trouble. They could name a master of coin. When people find out the treasury is empty, they'll have someone to blame. She just needs to think of someone who deserves a certain kind of punishment. She immediately thinks of calling on Torrin Manderling, the man who praised her move with the rats a few days earlier and complimented her boldness, but made her feel as though she knew nothing about the castle she's ruling. After the meeting, Rhaenyra meets once again with Alicent to ask her what she knows about Ormond, and she tells her that he considers himself a scholar, despises the ignorant, and that during the brief time she visited Old Town, she realized he was quite cruel. Alicent confesses that she gave Viserys 3 of her children, but the 4th one she wanted to be a Hightower, to grow up in those lands and learn the same stories she did. And considering what has happened to the 3 sons she left here, she's sure she made the right decision. One last thing she remembers about Ormond is that he has a very strong sensitivity to smells, which is why he's obsessed with his men bathing at least once every 3 days, and that could be a good way to get to him. As for Corlys, when his son goes to tell him the Queen needs to meet with him, he refuses and tells him that his job as Hand of the King will soon be available, since he plans to rebuild what was taken from him, but someone else could take his place. He tells him he's sorry he can't give him his legitimacy or his last name, but he can give him the chance to forge his own. Before his father leaves, Alan tells him that anger and frustration aren't something you can cut down with a sword, and that he should think carefully before turning his back on the queen. He gave everything he had to Rhaenyra, even his life, more than once, and she denied him the one thing he asked for, and for him, that's enough to make his decision. At this point in the story, we finally get an update on what happened with Aegon. After weeks of traveling, surviving enough assassination attempts, and the pain of his wounds, he finds his dragon's corpse. But after spending a few moments with him, trying to tell if he's still alive, some men show up and try to charge him for touching what used to be his. Realizing they have enough coin to pay, one of the thieves pulls out a knife, and at that moment, Larys knows he has to get Aegon out of there right away, or they'll be killed over a couple of coins. On the other side of the story, we travel with Criston Cole, walking hand in hand with Gwaine Hightower as they make their way through the halls of Harrenhal and hear something very large, far too large, moving nearby. Once they run into Alice, they ask her where the Castellan is, and she reveals that everyone was killed, as they can see from the soot on the walls, a sign that the fire reached even the smallest corners of the castle. She tells them Aemond was here. He took the castle along with his dragon, but when he learned that Rhaenyra had taken King's Landing, he left. And from the look on Gwaine's face, we can tell they had no idea what happened in the capital. They decide to stay there for a day while their men check the surroundings, and they discover there was a dragon's nest nearby, but it seems abandoned, which means the witch told the truth. Gwaine sums up the situation in a single sentence. King's Landing has fallen. They're stranded there without a dragon, and it's very likely both queens are now imprisoned. On top of that, their army is so depleted that there's nothing left to do but head home to resupply, except they don't have a home to return to. If they get close to King's Landing, they'll be beheaded, and Harrenhal, the burned castle, is the best option they have for now. Gwaine is very clear about what they need to do. They must travel to Tumbleton to join forces with his cousin. Even though he's arrogant and nearly unbearable, he's clearly no coward and no fool. But they will be fools if they stay here, waiting for a rescue that isn't coming. But Cole has other plans. There's no home for him. His father died of grief, and that's not a fate he wants to experience. His wish is to die in battle, and as long as he remains Hand of the King, his orders will be followed, which is why they're going to march against the Riverlands army, one that outnumbers them 20-1, but they'll strike like a scorpion killing an ox, turning into ghosts. Back in King's Landing, Alan informs the Queen of his father's decision, who has left with a contingent heading home, but not before promising to hunt down the thieves and vandals of the Triarchy who are threatening the kingdom's safety. Rhaenyra is a little disappointed, but Alan decides to take a risk and offer her some advice, telling her that her father has lost too much in recent days, and that since his decision, he's been feeling far more frustration than before. So maybe a fight is exactly what he needs, so he can come back to her side and advise her better. As for Aegon, he and Larys keep moving. Having escaped death just hours earlier, they run into a group of looters, stripping everything they can from the dead soldiers, and Larys begs him to try not to draw attention and to hide that dragon scale well, since they could cut off his hand just for having it. By the end of the day, they manage to reach the ruins of a castle, where everything they have left is taken from them in exchange for food and shelter. But in the following days, they'll need to work, and since Aegon refuses to do what's asked of him, they put him to cleaning out the latrines, since they need the waste for the crops. Back in Tumbleton, one of the Hightower captains grows tired of looking at his host's beautiful wife and decides to slip his hand under her dress, sparking a fight that ends with the man of the house being beaten down again and again with extreme cruelty. While that's happening in the small town of Tumbleton, in King's Landing, a rebellion is starting to take shape, since a message has been written on the city walls, "Queen of Bastards," pointing out that Rhaenyra's children have no noble blood and that she is illegitimate, with no right to the throne. We return at once to Tumbleton, where the matter of the beating has been brought directly to Ormond, who can clearly see that the mother-in-law's arm is broken, and the host's nose as well. And there are enough witnesses saying that one of those men tried to violate an innocent woman in a vile way. This is where we see the extreme cruelty we'd heard about regarding Ormond, since faced with such evidence, he orders that the man be castrated and that his arm be broken in the same place as the woman he attacked. On top of that, if he causes trouble again, he'll be hanged. The next time Rhaenyra sees Orwell, she asks him to hand over all the correspondence exchanged between the High Towers and the Red Keep, since she wants to know just how much power they hold over the city's faith, and to understand why the High Septon refused to recognize her without seeing Aegon's body first. As for Daemon, he has arrived at the Vale to discuss the matter, the promise made to the crown. The deal was simple. They would provide their men in exchange for a dragon, but they've been enjoying a benefit they haven't paid for, and that can't continue. But since the war has already been won, and the need for men isn't so urgent right now, Daemon accepts a payment as a gesture of goodwill, and once he has caraxes loaded with gold, he prepares to leave as soon as possible. The problem is that his dragon is somewhat restless, and a few seconds later, we find out why. Caraxes begins flying erratically and refuses to obey Daemon's commands, leading him to a cave in a nearby mountain, where he ends up finding signs of another dragon. So he draws his sword and sets out to explore the cave, while his dragon covers his back, sure that he's noticed something. From deep within that place, amid the darkness pressing in, we can see the glow of a dragon's jaws lighting up with fire, and the silhouette of a woman in the background. When she steps out and we can see her face, we discover it's Rhaenyra, his daughter, who has been surviving in this place completely alone, exposed to danger and the elements, and her tired face shows just how exhausted she is. When Daemon gets a good look at the dragon, he realizes it's Sheepstealer, the rebellious dragon that caused the death of his stepson Jace, and he has explicit orders from his wife to behead whoever is riding him. He never imagined it would be his own daughter. Rhaena confesses that she was only trying to help, but her dragon is wild and refused to obey her commands. She never meant to hurt Jace or the other soldiers. She was only trying to prove to her father that she was capable, and now she's ended up causing more pain than she can ever repay with her life. Daemon tells her to leave this mountain, to take a ship to Pentos, where she's supposed to be. Only that way will Rhaenyra never learn the truth, but she'll have to leave her dragon behind, since he's living proof of what happened. However, his daughter refuses to leave her dragon behind. He's a part of her, and he's the one who chose her as his rider. Daemon should know how strong that bond is, and he doesn't care that her dragon is wild, but her father tells her he can't be trusted. He already saw what happened the last time someone tried to ride him. His daughter tells him she'll stay in exile. He doesn't have to do anything or take any risks for her. After all, she's used to being the outcast among his children. The only way Rhaenyra will ever find out the truth is if he decides to betray her, but she won't stand before the queen to admit her mistake and face the sword. Before Daemon can keep talking with her, Rhaena withdraws and, a second later, flies off riding Sheepstealer. The only problem with her departure is that a shepherd was very close by and saw Daemon talking with someone with white hair. So if that rumor spreads through the city, it could reach King's Landing, and that's not something he intends to allow. Back with Aegon, he returns from collecting the urine and waste he was ordered to gather, when Larys mentions to him that the rumors around the castle are that he's dead, killed by his brother. The queen's own words. But even though this upsets him, Larys tells him this is actually good news, since when the moment of his resurrection comes, the people will realize the queen lied, and that he's blessed by the gods for having cheated death. A few moments later, when he tries to find some food, it turns out it's all been eaten, and he grows furious once again, walking straight up to the camp's leader and threatening to cut out his tongue if he crosses him again. But this is the moment when Aegon realizes he's no longer king, and can't go around bossing anyone. He's just a burned, useless man whose name is a lie, and if he doesn't kneel right now, he'll lose his life entirely. Aegon looks at Larys, and, seeing him with a dagger at his throat, decides to obey. He kneels and kisses the camp leader's boots, covered in waste, a lesson he won't forget. But something far more interesting is happening in King's Landing. Daemon bursts into the council meeting with words of justice and wealth. Not only has he brought back a large amount of gold from the Vale, he's also brought the head of Sheepstealer's rider, the killer of his beloved Jace, and he sets down in front of his wife the shepherd's head, though he made sure to burn it enough that it would be unrecognizable. At that moment, the council members keep talking, but Rhaenyra can only stare at the head, fixed in place, until she interrupts and tells everyone to leave at once. She needs to speak with her husband. Once they're alone, she asks him who that man was. How could he have claimed a dragon? And under which house does he fight? However, Daemon tells her he knows as much as she does. All he can tell her is that, as he was leaving the Vale, he saw Sheepstealer flying over the mountains. So he followed him and beheaded the man riding him. There was no need for questions, because claiming a wild dragon is an act of defiance, one that doesn't always end well. He was just a common thief, a lost cause, who thought he had the power to master a dragon. Rhaenyra tells him this isn't what she wanted. She longed to see him alive, so she could punish him herself for having caused her son's death. But if that's how things must be, then she accepts it, and she doesn't doubt that Daemon is being honest with her right now. At the same time, Alicent discovers that her daughter Helena is pregnant and has been wearing tightly laced corsets to hide the secret. Back in Tumbleton, Ulf arrives riding his dragon to stand guard and make sure Ormond's men don't escape the town before they receive fair punishment for their actions. Meanwhile, following the Queen's orders, everyone living near the places where the messages appeared on the walls is being dragged from their homes in the middle of the night and punished until they confess who did it. The chapter ends with Ormond leading Daeron into a secret room where they've brought the man who struck one of his soldiers, and for daring to lay hands on a high tower, he must be punished. And he tells him that everything they're doing, everything they're fighting for, is so that one day he'll sit on the Iron Throne and rule as a Hightower, as a Targaryen, since the world belongs to civilized people, not to the masters of beasts. But first, he must learn an important lesson, that justice must be served in every form. The soldier was punished for his actions, but the man dared to lay a hand on someone who is an extension of them, a man who has fought in battle under their orders, and who has defended their bloodline for far more years than he himself has been alive. Ormond places his sword in Daeron's hands, and the boy stabs the villager in the heart. At that moment, his dragon steps in and finishes burning the remains, while Ormond declares out loud that it's time to move his piece on the board, closing the chapter with a steady and fierce look in his face, while the dragon of Daeron eats the rest of the body.